General Hospital spoiler revealed that Tracy had built her life on controlling people. Controlling legacies, controlling the narrative of every room she walked into. But nothing had prepared her for the slow, gnawing obsession that Alexis Davis had unleashed in her. It wasn't simply rivalry anymore, it was something sharper, deeper, almost primal. Every time Alexis won an argument in court, every time she spun a story that bent the public's sympathy in her favor, every time she defended someone Tracy wanted crushed, Tracy felt a sting that dug beneath her skin like a parasite burrowing into bone. But this time it was different. This time, Alexis had crossed a line Tracy didn't even know she still possessed. And the rage that grew inside her was something that even she, with decades of manipulation and scheming behind her, struggled to contain. It began with the Willow case. Tracy watched Alexis twist narratives, manipulate timing, pull strings in ways that made even Quartermain machinations look amateur. Tracy understood power when she saw it, and Alexis was wielding hers with a focus that bordered on reckless brilliance. But what infuriated Tracy wasn't the skill, it was the audacity. Alexis had dared to protect Willow, to shield her from consequences, to build a wall of legal strategy so thick that even the Quartermain influence struggled to break through. And when Tracy realized Alexis was doing it not just for justice, but to defend her own involvement, her anger became something volcanic. Every time Tracy closed her eyes, she could hear Alexis's voice echoing in her memory, cool, cutting, self-righteous. Alexis had always been a thorn in her side, but now she was a storm tearing through everything Tracy valued: truth, control, reputation, and the fragile balance she had worked so hard to maintain. Alexis had manipulated the legal system, buried inconvenient evidence, and twisted the public narrative so thoroughly that even the Quartermains were starting to look like villains in a story they once ruled. Tracy felt humiliated now, insulted to her core, and humiliation was a wound that Tracy Quartermain never forgave. But what burned even worse was the obsession Alexis had left behind, not just in Tracy's thoughts, but in her actions. She found herself replaying every interaction, every argument, every carefully worded insult between them. She had grown consumed with the need to understand how Alexis had carved out so much influence, and even more consumed with the need to destroy it. Tracy was a strategist born and bred, and she recognized that Alexis had become a threat far more dangerous than Drew, Willow, or even Michael. Alexis was the one pulling strings from the shadows. Alexis was the one shaping outcomes. Alexis was the one rewriting destinies with the flick of a pen and the chill of her voice. So Tracy did what she always did when cornered. She dug. She dug into Alexis's past, her family, her mistakes, her secrets. And when the first thread appeared, then, promising, trembling with potential, Tracy pulled. What she found didn't just shock her. It lit a firestorm inside her chest. Because deep within a sealed layer of old court records, psychiatric reports, custody battles, and personal tragedies lay something explosive, something the Davis family had buried so deeply that even poor Charles had nearly forgotten it. Something Alexis would do anything to keep from the public eye. Something that could destroy her credibility, her career, and even her family's cohesion in a single blow. Tracy felt the thrill of discovery ripple down her spine. For the first time in weeks, she felt powerful again. It wasn't just information. It was a weapon polished and sharpened by Alexis's own arrogance. And the irony was so delicious it almost startled her. The very woman who had humiliated Tracy in court, who had orchestrated illusions of innocence around Willow, who had manipulated the narrative to protect her own people, was about to fall victim to the one thing she could never outrun, her past. But the danger of the secret was enormous. If Tracy revealed it, she wouldn't just embarrass Alexis. She would tear open a wound so deep it might split the Davis family apart. Sam, Christina, and Molly would be dragged into the mess. Old traumas would resurface. Long-buried truths would become public ammunition. The media would explode. The courtroom would ignite. And Alexis would be left in ruins, stripped of the moral authority she clung to so tightly. Tracy felt a dark satisfaction rise in her chest. Alexis had spent months twisting fate to her own liking. Now Tracy could do the same. She imagined walking into the courthouse, revealing the truth with calm precision. Watching Alexis's composure crack for the first time. She pictured the gas through the gallery, the shock on Laura's face, the horror in Sam's eyes. She pictured Alexis standing still, frozen, with nowhere left to hide. But the fantasy twisted into something even more dangerous when Tracy realized something deeper. Alexis wasn't the only one affected. This secret wasn't just personal, it was political. It could alter custody cases, criminal proceedings, and even the power dynamics of Port Charles. Judges would question every decision Alexis had ever influenced. Prosecutors would demand investigations. Every case she touched would be scrutinized, reopened, possibly overturned. And Tracy would be the one holding the match. That burned the foundation of Alexis's empire to ash. Yet revenge was never simple. Tracy understood the risk. Once unleashed, this secret would not be contained. It would take on a life of its own, spreading through the community like wildfire. And Tracy herself would become part of the storm she created, admired by some, despised by others, feared by all. But fear didn't bother her. It energized her. It reminded her of who she truly was, a quartermain, a survivor, a tactician, a woman who refused to lose. Still, a small voice whispered beneath the noise, "Is this too far?" But Tracy crushed the thought immediately. Alexis hadn't worried about going too far when she manipulated a courtroom, when she twisted truth to serve her agenda, when she humiliated the quartermain name in front of half the city. Why should Tracy hesitate now? The obsession in her chest grew into something more volatile purpose. It wasn't enough to win. She had to make Alexis understand what it felt like to be powerless. She had to make her feel the suffocating fear of watching everything she built crumble. She had to make her regret ever crossing paths with Tracy Quartermain. And as the days passed, as Tracy refined her strategy, her confidence grew. She had the secret. She had the motive. She had the anger. And most importantly, she had the perfect moment to strike: the courthouse, the press, the public eye focused on the fallout from Willow's case. One well-timed revelation would turn Alexis from victor to victim in an instant. Tracy could already see at the beginning of a new storm sweeping through Port Charles. A storm with Alexis at its center and Tracy pulling every thread. Because this wasn't just revenge anymore. It was justice, Quartermain justice. Cold, sharp, unforgiving. And Tracy had never felt more ready to let the world burn. Tracy had always been a master of pressure, polished, ruthless, strategic, but the intensity she directed at Alexis now was something far beyond ordinary conflict. It was personal, relentless, and sharpened with a precision only Tracy Quartermain could wield. She pushed not with shouting or outbursts, but with quiet, suffocating force, closing in on Alexis like a tightening vice. Every sentence was a demand, every insinuation a warning, every look a reminder that Alexis was running out of time to stabilize a situation spinning rapidly out of control. Alexis felt the weight of it like a storm pressing against her ribs, building with every breath she took. Normally, she would have met Tracy blow for blow, matching her wit and precision. But this time the ground beneath her was too fragile, too unstable. Because just as Tracy's pressure reached its peak, Alexis received the one update that could shatter everything she had tried to protect: Trina and Kai's report confirming that Willow, not Michael, was the shooter. The moment Alexis read the details, her pulse spiked, her stomach twisted, and a chill crawled up her spine. It wasn't speculation, it wasn't theory or rumor. It was evidence. Real, tangible, unforgiving evidence that Willow Tate, the woman Alexis had worked tirelessly to defend, was the person who had put a bullet into Drew Kane. Alexis felt the floor tilt beneath her. She had spent weeks believing she was shielding an innocent woman, believing that Michael was being framed, believing she could outmaneuver Justine Turner, Tracy, and even the PCPD. Now the truth hit her with a cruelty she couldn't brace for. She hadn't been protecting innocence, she had been shielding guilt. And that guilt was about to explode into the open with consequences she could no longer control. Trina and Kai stood in front of her, terrified, shaking, carrying a truth too heavy for teenagers to hold. They begged her to act, to intervene, to protect them from the legal fallout of what they'd uncovered. Alexis wanted to comfort them, to reassure them, but she couldn't even calm her own racing thoughts. Everything in her life, her integrity, her reputation, her moral code had been thrown into crisis. She could feel it unraveling inside her, thread by thread. And then Tracy stepped into the cracks. The timing wasn't coincidence. Tracy sensed vulnerability like a predator sensing blood in the water. She immediately increased the pressure, demanding that Alexis fix the situation before Port Charles collapsed into scandal. She wanted action, swift, decisive, brutal action to stabilize the courts, protect the Quartermain legacy, and ensure no one tied this disaster back to her or ELQ. Tracy's voice sharpened with each accusation, each insistence that Alexis needed to take responsibility for the chaos she had helped create. But beneath her cold, calculated rage, there was something deeper, a personal fury that Alexis had dared to outmaneuver her, had dared to influence a case connected to the Quartermain circle, had dared to rewrite a narrative Tracy believed she controlled. Tracy didn't simply want Alexis to fix the situation. She wanted Alexis humiliated. She wanted Alexis exposed. She wanted Alexis to feel the same powerless fury she had inflicted on Tracy during the trial. And Alexis felt it, felt the pressure building, felt the panic rising, felt the crushing truth that she had nowhere to turn. She had tried to defend Willow. She had tried to protect Michael. She had tried to maintain fairness and integrity in a system already cracking under its own weight. But now the truth threatened to gut everything. Drew had been shot by the woman Alexis defended. Michael had been dragged into a legal nightmare that could have been avoided. And Trina and Kai, two young adults she deeply cared about, were holding evidence that could destroy multiple lives if it surfaced. The pressure was unbearable, the guilt suffocating, and Tracy's demands only pushed Alexis closer to the edge. Tracy kept insisting that Alexis needed to stabilize the situation immediately. Before the PCPD caught wind of Trina and Kai's involvement, before Justine Turner reopened the case, before the press uncovered inconsistencies, before the quartermain name was dragged through the mud. But Alexis understood what Tracy refused to acknowledge: stability was no longer possible. The truth was too heavy, too volatile. The secret was too close to erupting. And now Alexis had to choose between two impossible paths: expose Willow and unleash complete chaos, or protect her and risk burying evidence, risking obstruction charges, risking her own career and reputation. The weight of that choice pressed into her chest like a physical force, making it hard to breathe. Because Alexis wasn't just dealing with legal consequences, she was dealing with emotional ones. She had invested herself in Willow's defense. She had allowed herself to believe in a woman who now looked more and more like a stranger. And underneath all of it was the haunting realization that someone wanted this outcome. Someone had manipulated events so subtly that none of them had seen it coming. Someone had orchestrated a situation where Alexis's moral compass became her downfall, where Trina and Kai were dragged into danger, where Drew became both victim and threat, where Michael became collateral damage. And now Tracy was demanding she fix everything, while Alexis herself was falling apart under the truth. Tracy's pressure intensified, her warnings sharper, her threats more dangerous. She hinted at consequences, hinted at exposure, hinted at secrets she herself had discovered, secrets that could destroy Alexis, the Davis family, and anyone connected to her. The obsession in Tracy's eyes wasn't hidden anymore. She wanted victory. She wanted control. She wanted Alexis on her knees. And Alexis felt her fear rising. But beneath that fear, something else began to take shape: a cold realization that the situation was far bigger than Willow's guilt or Michael's innocence or Tracy's vendetta. Someone had set a trap. Someone wanted them tearing each other apart. And Alexis, with her integrity cracked and her judgment shaken, was standing right at the center of it. The obsession was no longer Tracy's alone. It was becoming Alexis's too, an obsession to uncover who was pulling the strings, who was manipulating the narrative, who benefited from pushing her, Trina, Kai, Michael, Drew, and Willow into the same destructive spiral. The truth was coming. And when it surfaced, it wouldn't just be one life that shattered. It would be all of them. Tracy had finally cornered the truth she'd been circling for weeks, and once she possessed it, she refused to let go. The moment she confirmed Michael wasn't the shooter, something inside her snapped into perfect alignment. It wasn't relief. It wasn't justice. It was clarity, sharp, electrifying clarity that rewired the battlefield of Port Charles beneath her feet. Michael's innocence did more than clear a quartermain air. It repositioned Tracy at the center of power, giving her a leverage she hadn't tasted in years. And that leverage had a name: Drew Kane. Because if Michael didn't pull the trigger, and if the PCPD's theories were collapsing, that meant one thing: Willow was the shooter. And Drew, reckless and sentimental, was doing everything in his power to hide that truth. The weakness was glaring, the vulnerability intoxicating. Tracy saw Drew unraveling before he even realized he was breaking. She watched him speak in half sentences, scramble to explain contradictions, shield Willow with trembling desperation, and each detail stitched together a perfect picture of guilt. Not Drew's guilt, his terror, his obsession, his willingness to throw himself before a moving train if it meant protecting Willow from consequences she had created with her own hands. And that terror was precisely what Tracy planned to weaponize. She understood men like Drew. Men driven by guilt were predictable. Men driven by love were exploitable. Men driven by both were unstoppable in their self-destructs. Drew thought he was shielding Willow from legal danger, emotional collapse, public scandal. But what he couldn't see, what Tracy saw with unnerving precision, was that he was destroying himself, piece by piece. And Tracy knew exactly how to accelerate that collapse. She did not confront him publicly, nor storm his home, nor demand a meeting with Theatrix. Tracy approached him like a ghost slipping into a drafty room, quietly, calmly, with the serene confidence of someone who had already won. Drew felt it immediately. He sensed the shift in the air the moment she stepped into his path. The silence stretched between them in a suffocating line. And he knew Tracy had uncovered something catastrophic. She didn't need to say Willow's name. She didn't need to describe the evidence. Her expression said everything. "I know your secret, and now I own you." Drew's throat tightened, a primal instinct clamping down on his breath. Tracy watched the fear bloom across his face with clinical interest, almost amusement. And she savored the moment before delivering her blade of implication, not a threat. Not even a statement, just a cool acknowledgement that she understood exactly why he was fighting so hard to bury the truth. The message was silent but unmistakable. I can expose Willow whenever I choose, and you will give me what I want to stop that from happening. Drew's heart hammered so violently he thought he might collapse. His mind raced through every possible escape route, legal defense, emotional plea, strategic counterattack, but each path led to the same pit. If Willow was exposed, she would be arrested, destroyed, caged inside a system that had no mercy for crimes committed in panic or confusion. And Drew couldn't survive that, not the loss of her, not the guilt of failing her, not the collapse of everything he had sacrificed to protect her. Tracy didn't have to articulate anything. Drew was already negotiating with his own panic, and the more he panicked, the deeper Tracy pressed. She began speaking of Alexis as if it already belonged to her again, referencing quartermain assets Drew had touched, decisions he had influenced, votes he had swayed. She sprinkled reminders of his place, temporary, fragile, acquired through favor more than blood. And then she began stitching the truth together with surgical elegance. A man hiding a secret has no place controlling quartermain power. A man guilty of manipulating justice cannot influence family legacy. A man vulnerable to blackmail is a liability to the entire empire. Each phrase twisted deeper into Drew's psyche, pulling him closer to surrender. He wanted to fight. He wanted to stand tall. But Willow's trembling face flashed through his mind. Willow's panic? Willow's desperation? Willow's hands shaking as she whispered apologies she couldn't remember making. Willow staring at him like he was the only lifeline she had left in the world. He couldn't let Tracy ruin her. He couldn't let the truth surface. He couldn't let Willow face the brutal reality she had created. Tracy knew all of this. She had mapped his internal conflict long before this moment. She pressed in with the confidence of someone playing a game she had invented, watching Drew crumble exactly on cue. And that was when she made her silent demand: relinquish quartermain influence. Surrender LQ decision-making. Step back from the power he had accumulated, or she would reveal Willow's guilt. The more Drew tried to speak, the more the words tangled in his throat, suffocating him. Tracy didn't interrupt. She let him struggle. She let him drown. Because the heavier the fear pressed on him, the easier the surrender would become. And she was right. Drew's resistance broke in under a minute. He didn't shout, didn't negotiate, didn't attempt to outmaneuver her. He simply collapsed inward, his will folding like paper in fire. He agreed quietly, urgently, desperately to whatever she wanted. Power, influence, control. His position in the LQ, his voice in the quartermain dynasty. All of it. Tracy felt satisfaction flare through her chest, a slow, burning triumph that tasted like victory long overdue. But beneath that triumph, something darker pulsed. Tracy wasn't just winning. She was becoming addicted to the control she had seized. Drew wasn't simply surrendering. He was becoming trapped in a cycle of fear and compromise that would feed her power again and again. And most haunting of all, Willow wasn't just a secret anymore. She was a ghost haunting every future decision Drew would make. Tracy walked away knowing this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new realm of quartermain dominance, one built on secrets, coercion, desperation, and quiet destruction. And Drew, trembling in the aftermath, knew the truth with agonizing clarity. To keep Willow safe, he would now have to serve Tracy's will. Because Tracy didn't just own the secret, she owned him. And Port Charles had no idea the storm this new power dynamic was about to unleash. Tracy had crossed dangerous lines before, but the decision to put Willow behind bars was the boldest, coldest, and most calculated move she had made in years. To Tracy, this was no longer just a criminal case. It had evolved into a full-scale war to restore the order that she believed Alexis, Drew, and even Willow had carelessly shattered. After weeks of observing, investigating, and waiting for the perfect moment, Tracy finally reached the breaking point of her strategy. Willow was the key. Willow was the new adjustment, the sacrifice Tracy needed to reset the balance of power in Port Charles. And once she saw that clearly, Tracy didn't hesitate. She acted with precision sharpened by fury and ambition. The more Tracy studied the situation, the more she believed that sending Willow to prison would solve multiple problems at once. It would completely vindicate Michael, shatter Drew's leverage, dismantle Alexis's credibility, and most importantly restore the quartermain legacy to the position of dominance she believed it deserved. In Tracy's mind, Willow wasn't just guilty, she was a structural weakness, and destroying that weakness would collapse the false narrative Alexis had built. But underneath all the calculation was something darker, a simmering obsession. Tracy could not accept how Alexis had twisted the legal system, manipulated public opinion, and sheltered Willow under a blanket of manufactured innocence. Each move Alexis made felt like a direct attack on Tracy's name, her power, her authority. The humiliation burned into Tracy's pride and vengeance became unavoidable. And that vengeance took the shape of Willow's downfall. When Tracy secured undeniable evidence through Trina and Kai, she became a storm silent, controlled, but deadly. Willow became the perfect target. Tracy didn't scream, didn't threaten, didn't grandstand. She simply released the right information to the right hands at the exact right moment. Watching the legal machinery swallow Willow whole, the arrest happened swiftly, brutally, without warning. Willow stood frozen, helpless, unable to talk her way out, unable to run, unable to understand how everything collapsed so suddenly. And through it all, Tracy stood quietly in the background, watching her plan unfold with surgical accuracy. But Willow's arrest triggered the reaction Tracy had been waiting for: Drew's collapse. Drew could not let Willow fall into the system. His panic was immediate, overwhelming, and devastating. Tracy had predicted this perfectly. The more terrified Drew became, the easier he was to manipulate. And now, facing the possibility of Willow being destroyed by the truth, Drew began to crumble. He came to Tracy in desperation, pleading, bargaining, grasping at any chance to salvage Willow's future. And Tracy didn't need to say a word. Her silence alone was enough to corner him. Drew understood instantly that Tracy held all the power. She could expose even more. She could make the charges worse. She could bury Willow permanently. And to prevent that, Drew would pay any price. That was the moment Tracy had been waiting for. She watched him surrender without resistance. He agreed to her demands, one by one. With the weight of Willow's life dictating every decision he made, he relinquished power at ELQ. He gave up influence. He forfeited everything Tracy wanted. And he did it without hesitation because protecting Willow mattered more than protecting himself. For Tracy, this was victory. Not just a win, but a restoration of everything she felt the Quartermain family had lost. But something else shifted inside her during that moment. This wasn't only triumph. It was addiction. Tracy tasted control again, true. Absolute control, and it awakened something dangerous. Willow in prison wasn't simply justice or revenge. It was the beginning of a new era where Tracy could shape the future through pressure, secrets, and fear. Drew wasn't merely compromised, he was trapped in her orbit now. Bound by the thread she held over everything he loved. And Willow wasn't just a prisoner. She was the ghost haunting every decision Drew would ever make from this point forward. But Tracy's greatest blind spot was believing the game stopped here. She didn't see the storm brewing on the edges of her victory, the fury building in Drew, the guilt festering in Michael, the moral unraveling of Alexis, and the unpredictable changes Willow herself would undergo behind bars. Tracy thought she was restoring order. She thought she was securing her family's legacy. She thought she had neutralized every threat. But what she actually did was ignite a chain reaction that would reshape Port Charles in ways she could no longer control. And for the first time, even Tracy didn't realize a dangerous truth settling like ash in the air. The storm she unleashed wasn't finished. It was only beginning.